And welcome. Raise Your Inner Game today. I'm David Levin. This is our Friday episode, so we're talking all things inner game. Tuesdays are for sports and sports parenting. Fridays are for everybody. So how are you today? How are things with your inner game? Anything pulling at your attention, making things hard today, stressed, precious, anxious, tired, anything like that? Or are things pretty good? For me, pretty good. I'm a little bit stressed with a couple of business things that are moving slowly. I can't quite figure out what's going on there. That's on my mind a bit. We have a trip coming up. Planning for that always adds a little bit of stress, but it's going to be fine. And otherwise, things are good. Feeling good. Everybody's good. Let's call it good. So today we have a few, speaking of good things to talk about. Of course, my ups and downs for the week. We're going to talk a bit about the blame game and personal accountability. Great story this week from the Super Bowl. We'll talk again about the great Marshawn Lynch mental game practice that we have. Marriage and family therapist Michelle Thomas is joining us again today. We, of course, have our charging station challenge of the week, building on the one from last week, and our recommendations for the week. So we'll start with ups and downs. What things were lifting me up this past week? What things were pulling me down, making life harder? In the ups column for me this week, I think I mentioned earlier that I was running lights for my daughter's 8th grade play, right? Alice in Wonderland. I remember, right, I did say it because I was sort of freaking out when I couldn't figure things out with the light board. Well, the play had its run last week, and it was great. It was actually really fun. It took a bit of time, several performances, but it was fun, lovely, happy to be a part of it. It was actually my down, too, at times because I had a surprising amount of performance anxiety, which is funny to me because, I'm not on stage, and there wasn't that much to it, to doing the lights, once things are set up, but there were still enough ways to mess things up. And even though I was totally hidden away in the booth, and pretty much no one would know if anything went wrong, almost certainly, I was still nervous enough before the show that I had to do a little intentional work to bring myself down, talk myself down, get centered, relax, just try and focus, using some of my own, material there. It's kind of funny, again, because the stakes really were quite low. But I was pretty stressed. So anyway, ups and downs this week from the same source, the 8th grade play. Fun, just great, rich life, kind of fun stuff. I'll also say that things have warmed up this week. That always helps for me. Actually was able to take the new scooter out on a couple of errands the other day. Very fun that. Looking forward to the summer for that. So all good. All right, that's ups and downs. Next up, our quote of the week. All right, our quote of the week. This week we will hear from Joseph Campbell. He was a writer, professor in the 20th century, most famous for his Hero's Journey work and the Power of Myth series with Bill Moores, if you old enough to remember that. Anyway, his quote is, "Your life is the fruit of your own doing. You have no one to blame but yourself." Your life is the fruit of your own doing. You have no one to blame but yourself. This idea can sound sort of harsh, depending on the context. And it's interesting to me that he only talks about, what seems like bad things you might want to blame others for. It seems to me you could also say you should take credit where credit is due. But anyway, on the blame question, ultimately, I think this just really is true, especially with our inner life. External things are frequently not of our doing, right? They happen to us, but our inner state ultimately always is. And so when we get stuck in this cycle of blaming others or blaming our situation or whatever for our problems rather than taking responsibility for them, it keeps us ultimately from being happy and successful because we never actually do anything about it. Blame is the opposite of action, and action is how we make things better. So anyway, that's why I like this quote. It has a touch of tough love in there, yes, but it's true, and realizing it puts us on a much better path to making things better. So there you have it. Joseph Campbell, your life is the fruit of your own doing. You have no one to blame but yourself. Think about that, and we'll move on to the top stories. All right, top stories. This week, my top story comes from the Super Bowl, and you don't even need to know or care about the game for this one. This is a smaller item compared to everything else with the game, but I love it because it's a good news story, and I don't get to talk about many of those, it seems like. So anyway, the story is, near the end of the game, and it was a close game, like I think maybe tied at this point, less than 2 minutes left, there was a holding call on the Eagles that very possibly cost them the game. And people were all up in arms about it, as you can imagine, because the general consensus was that it wasn't the kind of call you should make at that point in the biggest game of the year. It wasn't flagrant. It was a judgment call. And again, it probably did cost them the game. You could really make that argument. But that's not what got my attention. The part I loved was that the player who the penalty was called on, his name's James Bradberry, afterward, he was total class. It would have been so easy and maybe even understandable to blame the ref like everyone else was doing. Man, he never should have made that call. We were robbed, blah, blah, blah. So easy to take that path. But instead, he said, yeah, I pulled the jersey. It was a holding. I mean, I hoped he would let it go, but he's a ref. It's a big game. He called it. It was holding. I can't get over how thrilling it was to just hear someone tell the truth about something and take responsibility for it. You know, geez, there is so little of that now. All the lying and gaslighting and bullshitting all the time. No reality, no accountability, alternate facts. It's just all you hear anymore. And it is so depressing and corrosive and wrong. So this one guy standing up and saying, yeah, well, I did it. It was holding. It's just the most amazing, thrilling, newsworthy item in the world this week. It's crazy. And by the way, it wasn't just him. You read the article, and I recommend you do it. The link's in the notes. There are many guys on the team, including the coach, all quoted having the same kind of accountable mindset. It's beautiful. So big hats off to him and the whole team, of course. But for the rest of us, can we please take a lesson from this? Can we please just act like grown-ups again? For God's sakes. This was a great thing for him to do, but it should not be so shocking and newsworthy. This should be the norm. This is how adults act. We are responsible. We own our mistakes. We speak the truth. God help us. How can this be so rare? I just don't understand it. So anyway, you can tell that one fires me up a bit. That was my happy news this week. Happy with a tinge of sad, I suppose, because it should not have been news in the first place. James Bradberry. Yep, I did it. What a refreshing thing to say. For our Tolstoy scale, how does it serve humanity? This is pretty great. I don't think it's quite a 5. It's not that epic, right? It is still pretty small in the scheme of things, but I'm giving it a 4+. This kind of behavior absolutely serves humanity, and we desperately need as much of it as we can get. All right, that's my top story. This week, James Bradberry and the Philadelphia Eagles taking responsibility for their actions. Can you imagine such a thing happening in today's world? My goodness. Next up, Inner Game Gold. All right, Inner Game Gold. So these are the ideas and concepts I come back to over and over to help me stay on track. So of course, we're going to be revisiting them on a regular basis because that's what I do. So last week, we broke that pattern a bit to talk about a new piece of Inner Game Gold, which was a beautiful inner game mechanics illustration from Alice in Wonderland, showing how our negative thoughts come at us and we tend to just go along with them and agree with them. And then what we want to do instead is to say, now, hang on, let's think about that, make our own choices and decisions. Anyway, hope that was helpful. This week, staying with the themes of personal accountability, personal responsibility, and sports, I want to revisit what I call the Marshawn Lynch technique. Marshawn, again, is an NFL football player, great player, running back. And he has this practice where he looks in the mirror and asks himself, what kind of person do you want to be today? And again, I just love that so much. It's the ultimate personal responsibility. What kind of person do you want to be? It's up to you. You're in control of the kind of person you're being. You'll be one kind or another. Either way, you might as well think about what kind you want to be and then get out there and do that. Total intention and ownership. I love it. So that's our Inner Game Gold for the week. Look in the mirror. Ask yourself, what kind of person do you want to be today? All right, think about that. We'll move on to Raise Your Outer Game. All right, Raise Your Outer Game. This is where we talk about things we care about in our outer life, our health, our relationship, our finances. And this week we're joined again by a friend of the pod, Michelle Thomas, marriage and family therapist. Michelle, good to see you. Thank you for joining us. I will say, folks, Michelle and I had this wonderful conversation a few minutes ago. It's just fantastic. I was so excited to share it with you, and it turned out I forgot to hit record. So I'm going to ask some of the same questions because it was such a good topic, and we'll see what we get this time. I'm sure it's going to be fantastic because Michelle knows what she's talking about. So anyway, I do want to ask you a little about this. Again, in the recording that I lost, it's forever lost, I was checking in, how are you doing? And you were talking about just all the stuff you had going on this week. It's this insane load of parenting week with, I'll just recap some. Your husband, Chris, is CPA. This is the time when CPAs are just at work all the time. We went to a lovely event last night, and your eldest daughter was there doing a performance, and she's in a musical, and you got the 3 kids. Oh, and you had a sick kid, too. So we were just talking about how there's just some weeks when parenting is just a lot, and kind of how you were dealing with that. So just talk a little bit about that again.
Sure. Yeah. So you capped it pretty well. The other thing I would add is that because it was a big piece, was my 13-year-old is very challenging right now.
Oh, right.
Really, she doesn't like any boundaries. She's kind of angry and upset with us. Almost at all times, it feels she wants to isolate in her room. And it's, I do a lot of questioning about, am I doing this right? I know it's not my job to be her friend, but it also really, really feels awful to feel like you're just constantly at odds, with one of your children. And so what I was saying is that when we went to this event last night, I was feeling particularly vulnerable and sensitive, and we had an argument, before we left, and with my daughter, and she stayed home, but I'm also there to support my eldest daughter, and she's super excited about what she's about to do. And so and then by the end of the night, I kind of reconciled with my 13-year-old, and we that a little bit got swept under the rug. We do have to address that, but we ended up talking just about school and her sister's performance, and luckily we videotaped it so she could see it. But anyway, it ended up all kind of working out by the time we all went to bed. And I was just and actually, now that I'm thinking about it, I had to go downstairs to let the dog out or do something. And I stood in the kitchen and cried because I was this was such a day. It just felt, I had a sick kid at home with me. I had to cancel all my appointments and reschedule them for other days. And then, had this argument with my daughter that lasted a couple of hours, went to this public event, saw my other daughter do this really remarkable thing that she's never done before. And it was just a roller coaster. And I was so happy that I reconciled with one daughter. The other daughter had this really amazing night. I also am no closer to understanding how I'm supposed to do, it's kind of it was just everything. And it was just a big day, but it's kind of, this whole week has kind of looked like that.
Yeah, there's so much in there to unpack. The thing that strikes me is just this, that's so much a story of what parenting is like. I mean, it is this, the roller coaster is a good term for it, this whiplash, this intense mix of hard and joyful and overwhelm, and oh my goodness.
Yeah.
I remember saying this in our early segment. We were out at dinner the other night, and there was a family there with younger kids, and I just flashed back, and I said to Margaret, I remember when, I think they had 2 or 3 younger kids, and when it literally felt sort of like a miracle whenever we made any transition. It like going out to restaurant dinner is like, oh my gosh, we made it through this meal. We're packing up now and we're going. It's like, I can't believe it. And I really remember that getting to school in the morning, all that stuff and that time schedule, and especially in the winter with all the layers and all the stuff and the lunches, and it's just like, I can't believe we made it. And it's day after day after day.
Yeah.
And most days, I'll say this now, maybe I'm putting rose-colored glasses on my memories. Most days I really liked it. I mean, I found it sort of enlivening and sort of thrilling, but there certainly were periods where it was like, oh my gosh, it's not great. It's too much. And
it's almost too much to even say like, oh, I had a good day or a bad day. It's like broken up into these chunks of time where, even in our morning, I would say there's 40 minutes of which are fine. People are eating breakfast, we're getting up, we're greeting each other. There's like 15 minutes of like, whose turn is it to feed the dog? And did you get your thing? And do you need to bring it in? Like everyone's kind of shouting and rushing because now time's ticking. And then somehow we all get in the car and we take a breath and pull out of the driveway and get to school. And then like I was saying, the last time, like I get back in my car and everyone's where they need to be and everyone was on time. And if I compare that to like 20 minutes before that moment, that just felt like such chaos. And somehow we just do this over and over and over again, right?
Yeah. Oh, it's crazy. I love it, and it's crazy. And so then we talked a little bit about how, your knowledge and education in the therapy world helps you know how to take care of yourself and navigate that stuff as best you can and find the space you need. Like you mentioned this morning, you just took some time, and didn't feel bad about that. And then the next question was kind of the difference between that, and I didn't say it that well then, and I can tell I'm not going to say it that well again now, but in the parents who come to you, that you really can tell that even just that sort of level of self-awareness to start with, and also having some strategies and permission is something that not everybody has. That it's really kind of the first thing you need to do with them is to help them start to just see some of that basic framing and the context. And just talk a little bit more about how you tend to help parents when they come in, like some of the earliest things, most helpful things, just starting out.
Yeah. I think a lot of people, when they're coming into therapy, whether it be, parenting issues, couples issues, individual stuff, is they just want to be heard and they just need a lot of empathy. That the way that they've been doing life is hard. And maybe that's with a difficult partner. Maybe that's parenting without a lot of support. Maybe that's really trying to do better than their parents did, but they haven't really acknowledged and processed their own childhood. And that's now affecting their relationships and their parenting and stuff like that. So I see a lot of it is collecting the information and then kind of reflecting back to them. Like, wow, yeah, this is a lot. This is a lot. And like, good for you to acknowledge you need help sorting all of this out. There's a meme, that I've seen on like from fellow therapists, like on Facebook and stuff like that, where they talk like there's someone that just has like basically like a knotted ball of yarn, or like kind of hanging above them, like just this maze of lines and whatever. And then like the next slide is of like being in therapy and they're like winding up the spools of all these pieces of yarn, because that's kind of what it is you're kind of organizing these things because it just feels like chaos.
I totally get that. And I think you mentioned earlier that one of the big things that on their mind is that they're just worried about not doing a good job, as parents especially, right? I mean, they're just freaked out that I'm failing. I don't know what to do. I can't do it. I'm damaging my kids forever. That kind of and I've heard that elsewhere too. That's really common.
Yeah, I mean, and even for me, who's read the books, done the studying, I hear the stories. Like, I don't know that I'm definitely not doing it right all the time. Let's just say that. I'm sure there's things that I'm doing, and really I'm just trying to improve. I'm trying to learn, trying to grow, take feedback, whatever. And no one's doing it perfect. Like, not a single person, no one on Instagram. Don't worry about it, people. Excuse me. It's not happening. So, so yeah, I think, one of the things, we talked about that is kind of the next step when people are realizing, like, what I would call is they're feeling dysregulated. Like, they're not, they're yelling at their kids. They're feeling super stressed out and triggered, and maybe growing resentment in their partner or their, ex-partner, if they're, co-parenting like that or whatever. So where I start with a lot of that is just the noticing. Like, let's notice where we're getting triggered in life, right? Like, what are there commonalities? Are there things, what are we seeing about that? And the noticing of what's the feeling that's coming up? What are the thoughts that are associated with that feeling? And how are you behaving? And that's cognitive behavioral therapy in a nutshell. That's super effective for people. Is then where can you find space? If you're noticing that you're getting ramped up and you're about to yell, can you find a beat there? Can you take a breath instead and think of a better way to say that isn't going to, like, scare your child or cause conflict with your teenager or whatever? And so that's kind of the beginning process of, what are you noticing? Can you take a breath? What can you remember? What's another thought you can have other than this kid's being a jerk, or whatever, to then have a different behavior and start responding in that way rather than the way you've been, habituated to respond.
Yeah, that makes great sense. And again, it ties in exactly with the kind of stuff we suggest in the Sports Academy stuff too. It's that process, not process, but that combination of first the self-awareness. What do I see coming up? Like, you can see the storm coming. Like, I think you mentioned earlier, the feelings arise before the behavior. And typically, if you're really slowing down the tape and looking, the thought arises before the feeling, before the behavior. But you can't do anything about it till you see it, right? I mean, so the first thing is to just develop that ability to kind of self-observe. And then you start to see those things coming, see the triggers. Like, do you sometimes have somebody who's like, I'm not sure what you're talking about? Like, how do you help someone who, like, they're so in that natural automatic process of feel, react? How do you help them recognize that there's actually kind of a step mechanism going on that they could step into? Or maybe it's not a problem very often. How often is it a problem where they just don't really even quite get what you're talking about?
Yeah, I think it's more often the issue that so if someone's having trouble with that, so it's kind of all of it, right? Like, some people come in, they know they're almost too self-blaming about, like, I'm a horrible person, I can't figure this out. What's wrong with me that I'm so depressed? And that's where a lot of compassion and empathy and self-love and, self-compassion comes in, of, like, because life is hard and things have happened and we gotta, like, figure this out together, right? And so they're already noticing at least about themselves, right? Whereas some people, right, come in and they're upset about their children, they're upset about their partner, they just kind of want to come and vent about how awful their boss is or whatever, the situation is. And then that's where I have to, like, bring them down into, well, we can't change your boss's behavior. We can't actively right now change your child's behavior or your partner's behavior or your ex's behavior or whatever it is. What we can talk about is, how are you processing all of that? How are you holding that? Because if you're holding onto anger and resentment with all these various, interactions, that's not serving anybody. In fact, that's how you got in the situation where you're like, you feel like you're seeking help because you need to get out of it, right? So then that's where we start tapping into, like, yes, I hear your child is, like, really aggravating you right now. How are you handling that? How do you feel? What do you think when they say that to you? Or because a lot of people, they can tell you about other people's behaviors and things other people are saying. That's easy. So then when I turn it and say, well, what did you think when they said that? How did you feel when they said that? What did you do when they said that? Then it starts turning it on them of self-exploration of, you obviously had a response. let's talk. That's a more productive use of our time here, is to help you figure out how to deal with that.
Yeah, that sounds great.
Yeah.
So I'm going to assume that most of our listeners have enough self-awareness to realize that they're seeing some behaviors in themselves that they don't feel great about, that they'd like to get a better understanding of and get a better handle on. So for them, just to land the plane, as they say, if somebody wanted to just work on something this week, what would you suggest was a little homework assignment for them to make a little progress, baby steps toward getting, seeing some better outcomes in their behavior when they get triggered?
Yeah, there's probably something then that's particularly triggering, let's say. Like if they're noticing like this dynamic is not going well, or this thing, I would start with, okay, well, what's your story about that thing? Like, what are you telling yourself about that thing? How do you feel about that thing? And sometimes, like, when I was saying that, I was even like, maybe it's getting out of bed to work out in the morning, and that alarm goes off and you have lots of decisions to make in that moment, right? And maybe if you're pressing snooze and you're not getting to the gym as often as you want to or whatever, but then you're just not feeling good about that, that's the part, that's the inroad, right? You don't like that. You actually feel better when you work out. So then what do we do? Okay, the alarm's going to go off. What is going to be your thought about that? Oh, I'm so tired, I don't want to do this. Or is it going to be, I know this benefits me, I'm going to feel better. And then how do we set that up for, you have your gym clothes out, you got your bag ready, whatever it is. So it's kind of about piecing apart the thing that you see, and that's comes with thoughts, feelings, and behaviors. And so how do we not only acknowledge them, but eliminate hurdles and barriers to getting that, to like even I think of maybe after school time is always really rough, because you're coming home from work, kids are home and tired and need a snack or whatever. If you're picking that apart, okay, what do you need to do to get yourself regulated at pickup so that you can really absorb the energy you're about to get from all of your kids, right? So maybe just in the car, on the way, you need to take some breaths and acknowledge, we're going to enter this space, together. And then also, kids are hungry. They're going to need a snack. Do you have that thought out and prepared? So it's kind of, I just think of it as like deconstructing the thing and what are the pieces you can tackle to set yourself up for success. And I know, like you mentioned last time, journaling, noticing, that's all super helpful. But kind of what's the thing that you are noticing needs improvement, and then really examining that.
Yeah. All right. That's great. So that'll be their homework for the week. Pick if there's one, you can identify a particular sort of dynamic, like you say, or a trigger that's happening for you kind of consistently enough to be an issue, to just give yourself a couple of minutes to just think about it and pick it apart. And what am I thinking? What am I feeling? How can I give myself some other options, some other ways to react? I like the snack example, because a lot of times, what's what I'm trying to say? The problem actually starts a lot earlier. Like if I don't have snacks on hand, that's going to be the precursor to that being a problem when that time comes. So what kind of things can you do to prepare yourself for that to go better? Plan ahead or whatever. Yeah. Excellent. All right. Well, thank you. Very helpful. Hopefully we will see you again soon. And right now that'll be the end of our outer game. Where's your outer game? I forgot what segment we're in. And then we'll move to our charging station challenge. All right, our charging station challenge for the week. We call it the charging station challenge, of course, because we also invite you to join us in our charging station challenge, charging station community. We'll talk about that in a sec. So last week, we had you monitor the pull you feel, the urge you feel to check your phone while you're with your family. That was a fairly tricky one, but I hope you're able to do it and that it helped you see how much that happens, because that is the first step to getting control of it. So this week, I want to continue with that. Rather than just making note of the number of times it happens, let's have you resist at least one of these pulls every day. So you're with your partner or your kids, you notice the impulse to check your phone, but you say, nope, not now, it can wait, and you resist it. That's the challenge. See if you can't do that just one time a day. It's going to take a bit of focus to even remember to do it in the first place, and then to notice the impulse, because, they happen very quickly. And then, of course, the willpower to resist it. It's actually a pretty big challenge, but I'm sure you can do it and that you'll love it. You'll really feel a difference when you do this. And not just because you are resisting and not being on the phone when you should be with people, although that's the obvious one. But there's another lift that comes from it, just from resisting the urge in the first place. So see if you get that experience. So give that a shot this week. Once a day, resist the urge to check your phone when you're with your family. Write down what that experience is like for you. And of course, bonus point for sharing it in the community. If you're not in the community yet, click the link in the notes. It's free. Just register and you can go straight into the challenge. And that's it for this week's challenge. All right, next up, highly recommended. So this is the things I'm crazy about right now, things I'm just loving on, books, shows, gadgets, etc., things I want to recommend. And oddly enough, I don't actually have anything to recommend this week. I'm still reading the same book, still watching the same shows, nothing new got my attention this week, so I guess that's how it goes sometimes. No highly recommendeds for this week. And that's it for today's episode. If you like what you heard, please do tell your friends and invite them to join us and subscribe and download and all that good stuff. And of course, rate and review the show wherever you get your podcasts. It helps more people find the show and get the mental health boost we all need. If you have teenagers in sports, check out our Mental Game Starter Kit. It is a great set of resources to help you get started on the path of helping your child boost their mental game. Go to raiseyourinnergame.com, scroll to the bottom, you can learn about it there and register. All free, again, as usual. Of course, super helpful resources. If you'd like to support the show so we can keep things ad-free, please click the Buy Me a Coffee link below, and thank you for that. For more mental game goodness, join our free community, the Raise Your Inner Game Charging Station. Click the link here or go to raiseyourinnergame.com/community. Again, it's totally free and you'll love it. Also, if you're listening to this on audio, but you like video, we post all our episodes on our YouTube channel as well. There's a link to that in the show notes. And then finally, we'll close with Leo Tolstoy from the Raise Your Inner Game book. The ultimate purpose in life is to serve humanity, That's what we're doing. We're serving the people in our lives. It's hard work, but it's super important. So please keep up the good work, and we'll see you next time.